What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to do a full story video. A full story video is when I basically sit down and take a bunch of videos and combine them together into one big video. Now, with that being said, though, today's full story video is going to be over X Factor. Now, X Factor in 2020 was one of the many titles that was basically launched after Jonathan Hickman had took over the X-Men books. Because when he took over the X-Men books, of course, we had a lot of different X-Men titles launched. So we had X-Men, X-Force, Excalibur, Wolverine, Cable, all those different books. But X Factor was one of them. Now, we covered every single issues of X Factor, and there was only 10 of them. Now, 2 of them were basically used to kind of help with crossovers when it came to the X-Men books. So, for example, X Factor number 4 was part of the X-Asaurus crossover, and X Factor number 10 was part of the Hellfire Gala event crossover. Now, in today's full story video, you're not going to have X Factor number 4 because X Factor number 4 is basically, like I said earlier, the X-Asaurus crossover event issue. And so basically that book right there ties into X of Swords. And honestly, it does not fit in with the rest of the X Factor books that we had covered. Now, with all that being said, though, when it comes to X Factor was basically a team that was put together to investigate murders that happened to mutants. So basically, if a mutant is murdered, X Factor would come in and investigate the murder scene. Now, this was only done because the twin sister of Northstar, Aurora, was killed off, and they had no idea why she was killed off. And so basically with her death, it brought a team together to go out there and to investigate other kinds of murders that were done to mutants across Krakoa or any other countries across the world. And so that is where X Factor comes in. It is kind of like your own police force in a way, where they basically investigate different murder scenes. But with that being said, I do hope you enjoy today's comic book video, full story, X Factor 2020 series. Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the dawn of X era of X-Men comics, we actually pick up with X Factor number 1. Now, with X Factor number 1, I really like this book a lot. And the reason why, because this book really focuses on characters who don't really get a lot of coverage in this time of Marvel Comics. And I mean like the 2010s and the 2020s. They pop up, but they don't get a lot of love or a lot of coverage in the books of today's time. They do show up, but usually they are a background character or they're just there for a couple panels and they're gone. And so my prime example is John Paul, because John Paul has been around since the early days of X-Men comics in the 1970s and 80s, when Chris Claremont took over the X-Men titles after the X-Men were canceled by Marvel. And when he brought the X-Men back, he began the process of making more characters. And one of those characters was John Paul. Now, when we met John Paul, he was part of a team called Alpha Flight. And Alpha Flight was a Canadian superhero team that Wolverine used to have connections to. Now, either way, though, John Paul has the ability of super speed, fly. He does have more powers, but some of those powers only activate when his sister is right next to him. Now, with that being said, the reason why we pick up with him is because he just got some kind of feelings or vision of his sister dying. And so with that, he's kind of like, my sister Aurora had just died. What in the world? And so you have John Paul directly go over to the Five. Now, the Five has the ability to bring almost anyone back to life. Now, here is the big thing though. When they're in the process of bringing someone back to life, it's not really bringing the person who died back to life. What they do is they make a clone body of you, and that clone body looks just like you. And then you have Charles Xavier and Cerebro download your memory into the new body that looks just like you. And so if you die, technically you are dead. But now a clone you is on Earth pretending to be you because it has your memory download into its body. But here comes the big thing though. John Paul wants the Five to bring back Aurora to learn who killed her or how did she die or why did she die. But you didn't have the Five say you have to bring us proof. And that right there is huge because if you have no proof and you go to the Five and say, hey, my best friend died, bring her back to life, and the Five believe you, even though you have no proof that your best friend died, and they bring a new clone version of your friend alive, and then come to find out that your best friend did not die at all, now you have two versions of your best friend out there in the world. And that can cause a lot of problems down the road. And so you have the Five telling John Paul, listen, we're busy. We have to bring back millions of mutants that were killed over the years in Marvel Comics. And listen, we'll be down to bring back Aurora, but to bring her back to life, we need proof to make sure that she is actually dead before there's two of her out there in the world. And so this turns into a whole investigation. And this makes sense because when it came to X Factor in the 1980s, originally it was a spin-off book from the X-Men book that was being written by Chris Claremont at the time. When Chris Claremont had the X-Men title under his control, Marvel told him, make more X-Men books, make more X-Men titles. And he made X Factor. But X Factor back then was just the original X-Men, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel coming back together as a separate team from the X-Men team that Chris Claremont was writing over in Uncanny X-Men. But in the 2000s, X Factor actually became a different kind of team where they went around and did police work. They were detectives. They try to solve mysteries. And so this is Marvel bringing that aspect back once again with X Factor. This book is about to be a way for them to say, we're going to bring you a detective X-Men team, and you should follow this team as they do some detective work. And right now, their first goal is to figure out what happened to Aurora, John Paul's sister. And so with that, he goes over to Sage. And remember, Sage, her mutant ability, it basically makes her a computer. But with that being said, she does tell John Paul Valley she did use a Pacific gate, but she did not come back after leaving that gate. Now, before Aurora had left to go through one of the many Krakoan gates as a way to travel across the world, she did go to a Pacific bar. Now, this bar is owned by the Blob. Now, the Blob has been around in X-Men comics for many, many years. And with that, he would remember if Aurora has stopped by in his bar. And so when you have John Paul go over to Blob and ask him, hey, did you see my sister? Blob says, yes, I saw your sister. She came in here. She had a few drinks, but she left in a hurry. It seemed like she had to go to a meeting. And that's all I know. Now, you do have John Paul leave to figure out who was his sister going to meet up with. But on his way out, he runs into Polaris. Now remember, Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, meaning that she has the same powers as her father. And she tells John Paul that he is going at this the wrong way. why not form a new team of characters that would be great to investigate different problems across Krakoa, starting off with your sister. What happened to your sister? Now, before Polaris and John Paul leave the bar to form this team, this new team that could possibly work together, they do run into Daken. I was told his name is Daken, not Daken, but either way, Daken is the son of Wolverine. Now, this is kind of cool because after Daken appeared in the early 2000s, and he was kind of a big thing for a lot of Marvel fans as the son of Wolverine, Marvel quickly forgot about him, and he fell in the background very, very quick. And so it's nice to see him being put back on the front burner once again and to be used as the Wolverine on this team. But of course, they tell Daken that he cannot join their team because Daken was a bad guy when he first appeared in Marvel Comics. And it's them saying, we can't technically trust you. You were a bad guy who was trying to kill your own father. That right there is really messed up. Now, we do get a quick page that tells us who is going to be on his team, starting off with Prodigy. Now, Prodigy is a character that has the ability to kind of copy or mimic physical and mental abilities from other people. But once they leave his area, then he loses those powers very quickly. Now, the other person is Rachel Summers. Now, Rachel Summers has the same power as Jean Grey. Matter of fact, Rachel Summers is the daughter of Jean Grey and Cyclops from an alternate timeline. But of course, she just stayed here in this timeline because this timeline is a whole lot better than hers. And finally, Eye-Boy. Now, we saw Eye-Boy back in Giant Size X-Men Nightcrawler, but Eye-Boy is just a boy who's covered by a bunch of eyes, and each eye has its own kind of sight. So, for example, one eyeball can see heat vision, another eye could have night vision. It's just each eye has its own kind of eyesight. Now, we do see the team come together, and so right off the bat, you do have everyone arrive at the gate that Aurora had used. And so right now, the team is going to be John Paul, North Star, Polaris, the daughter of Magneto, Rachel Summers, you also have Prodigy, and you have Eye-Boy. Now, Daken, he does join up as well to help the team out. Of course, the team does not want him there, but at this point, they're not going to say no because he did arrive and he is offering to help out, even though his intentions are all just so wrong. Because he says, listen, the only reason why I'm helping out is to bring your sister back to life because she is hot. And when she wears a specific kind of clothes, it's amazing. And so, of course, it tells you that Daken is not really doing this to be a good person. He's doing this for his own pleasure. But either way, though, you do have the team come together and actually walk through the same gate that Aurora had used to leave Krakoa. Now, after using the same gate that Aurora had used, they do go to a nearby motel. Now, the reason why they went to this motel is because Aurora has been renting out a room almost every day for the past week for this motel. And so with that, you have the team go to that motel room to hopefully find some more clues to figure out why did she come here for, who was she with, and what happened to her. Now, you do have Daken actually go over to see the owner to hopefully see if the owner knows anything at all, while the rest of the team look for clues in the motel room. Now, as the team looks for clues in the motel room, they do find out, yes, she did come here. But when she did come here, she always got ready. And when they said she got ready, it seemed like she was getting ready for something romantic, hopefully meeting some special person. Now, with Daken, when he goes and talks to the owner tells him, yeah, she always came here. And when she did, it was always in the same car with the same guy over and over again. But of course, neither does Daken nor the team who were looking for clues in the motel room were able to figure out what guy she was meeting up with. But either way, though, you have the team realize that amazing baby, the werewolf that Rachel Summers got from the Excalibur team, was able to pick up a scent of Aurora. And with that scent, maybe it could lead them to over where Aurora's body is at. Now, with the team following that scent, it does lead them to a nearby bridge. And when they get to that bridge, of course, they do see some damage was done to the bridge. And with that damage on the bridge, it tells them that a car did go over the bridge. And that car could have been the same car that Aurora had drove. And so you have Polaris, Rachel Summers, and Prodigy use their powers as a way to find the car that had possibly fell into the river. And when they were able to find the car, you have Polaris use her powers to bring the car out of the river. And when they did that, bam, they find the body of Aurora. And for John Paul, this is so sad to see. Somehow his sister died. But of course, to the team, it does seem like it wasn't an accident. It seemed like she was killed on purpose. But for John Paul, at least now he has proof that his sister had died. And so now he can take this proof, which is her body, back over to the Five so they can begin the process to bring her back to life. And so when you have John Paul bring his body over to the Five to show proof that she did die, that she was killed, you have the Five tell John Paul and the rest of X Factor team that they need to tell the Quiet Council. Because when it looks to John Paul, to his sister, she was killed. It wasn't like she fell in the river and drowned. No, it seemed like something happened to her. Someone killed her. Someone purposely drowned her. And that is a huge problem. And so with her death being labeled as foul play, John Paul and the rest of X Factor, they need to tell the Quiet Council. Now remember, the Quiet Council is kind of like the leaders of Krakoa. They decide what goes on for the new nation. And so with something like this big happening, of course, the Quiet Council needs to come together to figure out what they're going to do to figure out who killed John Paul's sister, Aurora. And you have Dakin take the body over to Dr. Reyes so she can begin the process of doing an autopsy to figure out what happened to Aurora. Now, you do have the X Factor team take all this information over to the Quiet Council. And when they do, you do have the Quiet Council kind of like, okay, but what do you want me to do with this information? And you have X Factor say, look, Aurora's death, it wasn't normal. She was murdered. She was killed by some guy named Eddie. And Eddie purposely tried to kill her. It wasn't like an accident. It was on purpose. And so it's basically X Factor saying, let us form a new team on this island that can go around and investigate problems like this are similar to this right here. Because right now, you do not have a team that can actually go out there and investigate different problems like this. Look at X-Men, look at X-Force, Excalibur, Marauders. All those teams right there, they don't actually investigate problems like this at all. And so that's where we come in and we can do an amazing job. I mean, look at all the clues we got just for Aurora's death. Now, you do have the Five step in and say, listen, Quiet Council, we have other mutants coming to us and telling us that something had happened to their family members or their best friends. And so with that, it's the Five saying, with X Factor being here as a team, it can actually help us out as well. Because now you have a lot of people who want to bring their loved ones back to life, but of course, they have no proof. And so that's where X Factor comes in. And you do have X Factor get approved. They can be a new team on Krakoa. Now, at first, the Quiet Council wanted Polaris to be in charge. But then you have Polaris say, no, she wants John Paul to be the one in charge of X Factor. And so now X Factor is a new team on Krakoa. And so to kind of wrap up this book and wrap up today's video, we actually pick up with Polaris building a new location for X Factor to work out of on Krakoa's island. And you do have Forge hand over a new kind of device that they could literally use as a way to see all the different cases they are going to have while being on Krakoa. And so with that being said, this is where we are. What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are going to continue our coverage over the dawn of X era of X-Men comics, and we actually pick back up again with X Factor. Yes, X Factor. Now remember, X Factor is the X-Men team that does some detective work. They go around trying to solve different cases that involve murder, but of course only mutants that have been murdered. And so right now we're going to cover X Factor number 2 and X Factor number 3 as well. Now, let me tell you guys right now, after this video right here, we are not going to see the X Factor team until we get into the X of Swords event that we are going to cover very soon on this channel. But with that being said though, right now in this storyline, we are going to see the X Factor team actually go into the Mojoverse. And this is a classic dimension the X-Men have traveled so many times throughout the years of Marvel Comics. And honestly, I like the idea of this team going back there, but at the same time, I don't really like this story, but we're gonna cover it for our coverage over the dawn of X era of X-Men comics. But I do hope you enjoy X Factor number 2 and number 3. And so in the opening pages of X Factor number 2, we actually pick up with some random character just teleporting on Krakoa. And matter of fact, she teleports outside the home of the Five. Now remember, the Five is a group of mutants that have the ability to bring someone back to life or make a clone of someone that had died in the past to give that person another chance in life. And so right now you have the Five having a meeting, but our new mysterious character teleports outside their home and then just walks away with some package in her arm. And she takes that package right to the front door of the X Factor team. Now, no one saw the package being delivered in the middle of the night. And so with that, the package stayed at the front door throughout the whole night until in the morning when the X Factor team actually got a visitor. And that visitor is no other than Aurora. Now remember, Aurora is the reason why X Factor came together, because she died back in X Factor number 1. Because her and her twin brother Northstar share some kind of twin connection. When she died, he felt her death. Now, he did go over to the Five to ask them to bring her back to life, but of course they told him, if you want us to bring her back to life, you need to show us proof that she's actually dead. And so with that, you have Northstar basically form the X Factor team to gather some clues to figure out where was her dead body. Now, once they found her dead body, they took her dead body over to the Five as proof that she was needed to be brought back to life. Now, in the present day, this is her first day being back to life. And we see her going to her brother's new home to talk to him about what happened to her, which basically was she was killed. Now, she does not remember how she was killed, but she does know that she was killed. Now, with that being said, though, when she walks into the home of X Factor with the package in her hands, because it was at the front door, you have everyone just so excited to see her, like, oh my God, Aurora, you're here, you're alive again, it's great. Wait, what's that package? Now, of course, when they do open the package up, it's full of blood. Yes, you heard that right. full of blood. But then there's a wristband in there. And with that wristband, you have Dakin realize there are a lot of different symbols all over it. Like someone was actually holding on to this wristband and they had a lot of different sponsorships from different companies, possibly across the earth. But of course, now the big question is, why in the world was this package delivered to this team with blood all in it and only a wristband left behind? Now, this is the moment you actually have Aurora freak out. And the reason why she's freaking out, because she's been bombarded with a bunch of different questions about the package. Because this is X Factor wondering if she saw anything while she was walking up to the home of the X Factor team. Did she see anyone who could possibly look suspicious? Now, of course, she just screams because she was only brought back to life a couple hours ago. And when she was brought back to life, she remembers being killed off. She was told that she was killed off. Now, she does not remember who killed her, but of course, this whole idea of being brought back to life, it's a new thing to live through. And so, of course, when she arrived here, she did not expect to be thrown into another X-Men problem or another X-Factor problem. She only came here to see her brother because she was brought back to life. Now, that is the moment you do have X-Factor get word that someone was killed off in the Mojoverse. And apparently there was a mutant from Krakoa who went into the Mojoverse for some kind of competition and they died over there. And so now it's X Factor's job to go into the Mojoverse to figure out how in the world did that mutant die over there in the Mojoverse. Now Aurora is going to stay behind because again, she was just brought back to life a couple hours ago. She does not want to deal with another huge X Factor problem at the moment. She wants to relax until she can actually think straight. Now let me try my best to explain what is the Mojoverse. So the Mojoverse is one of the many extra dimensions in the Marvel universe. But the way this one works is that you have creatures known as the spineless ones. But what happened with this universe was when humans in the regular Marvel dimension, when they began the process of actually using radio and television signals, some of those signals actually traveled to the Mojoverse, and it actually hit some of the brains of the spineless ones. Now, when that happened, it began the process of the spineless ones falling in love with television and the way of being entertainers. And so ever since then, they have always been doing something crazy in their dimension as a way to broadcast their different kinds of game shows or competitions or regular TV shows across all dimensions in the Marvel universe. That is the main thing about the Mojoverse. Now, when it comes to Mojoverse with this book right here, they have evolved with the times of broadcasting, meaning that as we humans have found new ways to broadcast television, news, and any other kinds of media, so has the Mojoverse dimension as well. On top of that, when the X Factor team arrived in this world, they had to pay to get a bunch of TV channels and other media packages hoping to figure out who killed the mutant or the name of the mutant that was killed. Of course, the payment did not work because Mojoverse wants to keep it a secret to make people pay more. Now, you do have Northstar ask some random people of Mojoverse questions about what is going on here in this dimension. They don't really tell X Factor much, but only tell them that they are lucky. The reason why is because they are mutants. They don't need any kind of sponsorship to get some airtime because they are mutants. But that is the moment we actually get introduced to Mojo World. Now, Mojo World is where basically you have all the big time media stuff happening in Mojoverse. Now, here's the big changes that were made when it comes to Mojo World. If you want access to Mojo World, you have to be approved by the viewers. The viewers must like you to be approved entry into Mojo World. And so with that being said, you have X Factor right now now trying to show the viewers of the TV show that they're on right now that they should gain ability to access Mojo World. Now, most of the X Factor team were approved except for one. And of course, the one who does not get approved is Dakin. And the reason why, because Dakin tried his best to make the viewers hate him so that he would not get approved entry into Mojo World. And the reason why, because he wants to go back home to Earth to bang North Star's sister Aurora. Yes, you heard that right. He basically wants to leave the mission to go back home to basically have some fun time with North Star's sister Aurora. This dude is crazy, but of course it is Dakin, the son of Wolverine. Now, after the rest of the X Factor team were able to get approved entry into the Mojo World area, that is the moment they are stopped by another security guard. And this security guard basically tells X Factor that even though they were able to gain entry into Mojo World, they still need a sponsorship if they want to actually walk into Mojo World. Now, luckily for X Factor, they do find someone who is going to sponsor them, and that person is no other than Mojo himself, the ruler of Mojoverse, and he says he'll be the one to actually sponsor the X Factor team to let them come inside Mojo World. Now, this is also the moment where you basically have Mojo tell us as the readers that he wish he had more popular X-Men characters here right now rather than the X Factor characters, because most of the X Factor characters are a bunch of C-list or D-list characters that most fans don't care of. But he does tell us that when it comes to mutants right now in the Mojoverse, they're still popular. So no matter what, if they are a C-list, D-list, or even an E-list character, because they're right now in the Mojoverse, they're still popular because they are mutants. Because right now in the Mojoverse, mutants are very popular as entertainment in the Mojoverse. Now, with that being said, you do have X Factor get very upset because they came here to figure out who was killed, what mutant was killed here in the Mojoverse, and on top of that, who killed that mutant. And so you do have X Factor begin the process of actually attacking Mojo to learn more about who killed the mutant or what is the name of the mutant that died. Now, at first, Mojo is kind of like, I'm not going to tell you anything. But of course, you do have X Factor able to scare him just enough to give out some information. And what he says is that when it comes to Mojo World, you have 5 people, the most popular live streamers in the Mojo World, and each of them have their own studio. The mutant that X Factor is here for, that mutant died on one of the top 5 live streamer shows. And so the X Factor team needs to go to that live streamer to figure out what happened to that mutant. Now, of course, one of the top 5 live streamers is no other than Spyro herself. Now, Spyro is an old X-Men character. She first appeared, I want to say, back in the 1980s. I could be wrong. Now, with her being one of the top 5 live streamers, of course, the mutant that the X Factor team is trying to learn more of, that mutant died on Spyro's show. And so right now, you have X Factor heading over to Spyro to get more information about the mutant that had died on her show. But while you have X Factor on their way over to Spyro's show, that is the moment X Factor is attacked by another group of live streamers. And the reason why they're attacked by another group of live streamers is because this group right here, they're not even in the top 5 of the top 5 live streamers. And they're trying to get into the top 5. And they know that mutants are very popular. And so if they're able to kill off X Factor, there is a possibility they could get some boost in their numbers into the top 5. And so if X Factor wants to go see Spyro, they have to deal with this other group of live streamers first. But back in the home of the X Factor team, we do see Aurora watching television. And of course, she's watching X Factor right now fight against these others live streamers. But that is the moment you have the husband of Northstar walk into the home of the X Factor team looking for his husband, Northstar. And of course, you do have Aurora run up to Kyle and kind of like, hey, Kyle, it's nice to see you. I'm alive again. Oh, you're looking for your husband? Well, let me tell you, your husband and his team are on TV right now getting ready for a big battle. And he's kind of like, wait, what? Where in the world is my husband? And so when we jump into X Factor number 3, things get even crazier. And what I mean is that when we actually jump into X Factor number 3, we actually pick up with X Factor right now fighting against a bunch of random live streamers. Now, while our heroes are fighting against these random live streamers, you actually have Spyro recording the fight. Matter of fact, she is using this fight as a way to boost her numbers up. That is how crazy it is. So while these guys were originally fighting against the X Factor team for their own stream, you have Spyro using their fight for her own stream. It's just ridiculous. But either way, though, you do have X Factor being able to actually defeat these random live streamers. Now, of course, right after that fight, you do have X Factor wanting to ask Spyro a bunch of questions about the mutant that had died here in the Mojoverse. Because remember, X Factor still has no idea what mutant died here in the Mojoverse. They have no idea how the mutant was killed here in the Mojoverse. And so right now, you have X Factor just asking Spyro a bunch of questions, but of course, she tells X Factor, you must wait until commercial break is actually over. Once commercial break is over, then I will tell you everything you want to know about how your mutant was killed here in the Mojoverse. And you're kind of like, dude, she's annoying like no other. Now, when commercial break is actually over, you do have Spyro go back on live on her live stream, and she does show X Factor a video. And this is the moment we kind of find out what mutant died here in the Mojoverse. And that mutant is no other than Wind Dancer. Now, of course, Wind Dancer is one of those characters that most fans don't really know of. But when she does pop up, honestly, she doesn't do much for the X-Men comics. Now, with that being said, though, she was the mutant that had died here in the Mojoverse. And matter of fact, she was on live television when she was killed. But here is the big question. Why was she here? And why did she die here? Two big questions, actually. And so with that being said, you have X Factor continue to basically trying to force Spyro to answer all of their questions. But then you have Spyro say, no, because you're trying to rush me, I am going to teleport you guys somewhere else. And so what she does is she teleports X Factor to the battle pits. But back at the Boneyard, we actually pick up with Aurora. Now remember, the Boneyard is the home of X Factor back at Krakoa. Now with that being said, Aurora thought that she was home by herself because she knows that X Factor is right now in the Mojoverse. But when she walks into the kitchen, she sees Dakin. Now remember, the reason why Dakin is back here at the home of X Factor is because when it came time for X Factor to gain access to Mojo World, he was the only one turned away. And he did that on purpose to come back home to try to get in bed with Aurora. And right now, he is going to try his best to get in bed with Aurora. Now, I like this moment a lot because you do have Aurora as Dakin. Why in the world are you wearing a shirt? And you have this man basically compare himself to Pokemon. He's kind of like, I'm like Pokemon, the perfect creature in that game. I'm so perfect that, sometimes I don't need a shirt. And the only reason why I'm wearing a shirt right now is because it's so soft. And you're kind of like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. But you know what? Let's go ahead and move on. Now, of course, once he's able to get her comfortable and he realized that she kind of does like him back, this is the moment the dude literally asks her one question that ruins everything. He asked her about the guy that she slept with that could have possibly killed her back in X Factor #1, which to me is kind of like, if you want to get in bed with the girl, why in the world would you bring up the idea of the guy who basically killed her after he had slept with her? Like, why would you bring that up? Why would you? But he did. And of course, it made her angry and she walked away. But when we jump over to the X Factor team, we actually pick up with X Factor right now fighting against a bunch of random live streamers. Now, while X Factor is doing all of that right there, that is the moment you have Northstar stop in his tracks. And the reason why? Because he sees somebody else that he knows very well. And that person is no other Shatterstar. Now, Shatterstar was one of those characters that fans loved in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, fans really did love this character. Now, here comes the big thing though. When Northstar sees Shatterstar, had a hard time saying that. When Northstar sees Shatterstar, you have Shatterstar stop in his tracks and run over to the X Factor team. Now, when he does that, this is the moment you have Shatterstar tell the X Factor team two important things. The first thing is that when it comes to Sophia, aka Wind Dancer, it wasn't like she was killed off by some random person who wanted to kill her. Instead, when it came to Wind Dancer, she actually killed herself to feed the numbers because she was also a live streamer. Because in the Mojoverse, the #1 entertainment right now is mutants. And so with that being said, she basically was trying to make herself better in the eyes of live streamers across the world. She was trying to get her numbers up. And so she knew that if she killed herself, her numbers will basically shoot all the way up. She could possibly be #1. Now, here comes the big thing though. You did have Shatterstar tell us that with the death of Wind Dancer, it did boost her numbers up. But now they're going to do an autopsy on her to basically continue to help her numbers. They're going to look inside her body to learn more about how the mutant gene works. It's honestly very sick. Now, the second thing, you have Shatterstar tell his old friends, the X Factor team, that right now he's being mind controlled by Mojoverse. Now, he doesn't just flat out tell his team, it's just the way he's talking to his team. And so with that being said, they're kind of like, he's being mind controlled and he really can't speak for himself. Something is going on here. Now, right after all of that right there, you actually have Shatterstar tell X Factor one more piece of information, that when it comes to Mojo, his next goal was to actually clone Wind Dancer, make clones of her, and continue to use the clones as the way to boost the numbers of entertainment in the Mojoverse. Because right now, mutants are the #1 thing. And Sophia, aka Wind Dancer, she was one of the best things here in the Mojoverse. And so if they're able to make clones of her and use those clones as a way to boost their numbers, they're going to do that. Now, of course, you do have X Factor like, nope, we cannot let that happen. And so you do have X Factor being able to get the body of Wind Dancer so that they can leave the Mojoverse and go back to Earth. Now, the last page of X Factor #3 is really more of Marvel leading us into the X of Swords event. And the reason why I say that is because we actually do pick up with some female X-Men characters right now at the bar just minding their business. Now, of course, those characters are I want to say Storm, Psylocke, Domino, Mystique, and I have no idea who the fifth lady is. But out of nowhere, all 4 females, the one named, they are teleported away. And when they come back, they have a bunch of guns in their hand. Now, between the time that they were teleported away and when they came back, the fifth lady, which again, I have no idea what her name is, she basically tells the bartender that, don't worry, they'll be right back. The next book is a tie-in. which is a hint that X Factor number 4 is going to be a tie-in for the X of Swords event. But with that being said, what's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the reign of X, and we actually pick up with X Factor number 5. Now, with X Factor number 5, it is basically going to show us or tell us that we are going to continue the storyline that took place before X of Swords. Now remember, X Factor is a team of mutants who go around and try to investigate the murders of mutants across the world. Now, before X of Swords, X Factor was working on a particular case, and this case was them figuring out what happened to Wind Dancer, of course, another mutant who had died but died over in Mojo Verse. Now, when they went into Mojo Verse, they found out that apparently Wind Dancer wanted to die because in Mojo Verse, you do a lot of different things to get the views. And mutants were very popular over in the Mojo verse. And so, of course, Wind Dancer went there to be like an entertainer. But of course, to get the views, she killed herself. And so right now, X Factor is trying to figure out why. Well, we know why, because she wanted the views. But X Factor do a lot of work before X of Swords to figure out what happened to Wind Dancer. And so getting into X Factor number 5, we actually do pick up with the X Factor team showing a video over to the 5. Now remember, the 5 is basically a group of mutants who have the ability to bring you back to life. Now you have to remember though, that it's not you actually coming back to life. It's more of you getting a clone body made of you and your memories downloaded into that new dead body. Now with all that being said though, the reason why X Factor is showing a video to the 5 is because when X Factor goes out and to investigate a mutant's murder, they have to find proof that the mutant is actually dead and then hand that proof over to the 5 so that they can bring that person back to life, because the 5 does not want to bring someone back to life if the person is still alive, because then you'll have two characters out there at the same time, which of course will cause more problems. Now, of course, they're right now showing their X Factor is showing the 5 the video of Wind Dancer, because the video is showing that Wind Dancer was down to kill herself to get the views. And her producer kept telling her, we can find different ways to keep you alive, but to make it seem like you did die so that you can still get those views. But Wind Dancer wanted to die to get those views. And so, of course, she basically shot herself, her head exploded, whatever. She killed herself to get those views. But now with the video being proof that Wind Dancer is actually dead, on top of that getting her body before X of Swords, now the 5 can begin the process of bringing her back to life. The problem is though, this is kind of the X Factor book telling us what's going to happen now after X of Swords. And what I mean is that, remember, in X of Swords, Rockslide, a mutant, he died in Otherworld. But because he died in Otherworld, and when the 5 tried to bring him back to life, the problem was though, he came back corrupted. He wasn't his original self. And so that freaked out the 5 and they shut down the rebirth system. Now, of course, they want to relaunch the rebirth system, but they're kind of scared to do it because they feel like their system could also be corrupted. And so this is them kind of asking the X Factor team to kind of help out with the idea of relaunching the rebirth system. Now, we actually do jump forward in time where we actually do pick up with the X Factor team right now at the home of the 5. But the reason why they're there is because of Rachel Summers. Now, remember, Rachel Summers is basically the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, but from an alternate timeline. Now, with that being said, the reason why we're picking up with Rachel Summers is because she is going to use her psychic abilities as a way to read the mind of Rockslide. Now, remember, this Rockslide is the corrupted Rockslide, not the one most X-Men fans know of. But of course, they want to know what this Rockslide knows. Now, here comes the big problem though, because as soon as she tries to use her powers, she is sent flying back into a wall. Now, the reason why, because she said she hit the beginning of his timeline, meaning that when she tried to see his memories, when she tried to go to the very beginning, she was pushed back because she reached the beginning of his timeline that quick. Now, of course, she's going to show X Factor and the Five what she saw in the mind of this corrupted Rockslide. And what Rachel Summers actually tells us is that when it comes to Rockslide and his memories don't go back to when he was a kid or when he was Rockslide or when he was on the X-Men. None of that. His memories actually started when he came out of the rebirth system, the corrupted Rockslide. When he was made, that was when his memories was technically starting from. And so he doesn't have much to remember. On top of that, a lot of brain functions that most people have, he does not have right now. And so right now, the X Factor team kind of has to treat him like he's a toddler. They kind of have to take care of this corrupted Rockslide. And so now we're kind of left to believe that there is a possibility the X-Men may never get the original Rockslide back at all. Now, of course, you didn't have the Five say it's about time to welcome back one of their friends. But of course, you did have somebody on the X Factor team wonder if a particular character is going to come inside to join the rest of the characters. And of course, that person is Emma Frost, who's right now standing outside the home of the Five because she's very upset with something. But that actually does lead into the rebirth of Wind Dancer. And so this shows the Five and X Factor that they do not have any more concerns. And the reason why I say that is because now with Wind Dancer being back, that means the Five can relaunch the rebirth system and begin the process of bringing back all the characters who had possibly died over the last few days, weeks, or months. Now, of course, as soon as Wind Dancer begins to come out of her egg and she's brought back to life, you do have Wind Dancer basically go up in the air and fly around because she loves the idea of being able to fly around and having that freedom. Now, of course, you do have X Factor in the Five ask her one particular question. Why did she kill herself? Yes, we know it was for the views, but her producer told her that she had ways out of this where she could still technically die, but still be alive. And so that is the moment you have Wind Dancer say that when it came to Mojoverse and actually Mojo himself, Mojo kept a tight leash on her. And so even though other characters who were in Mojoverse who were trying to help her escape, she couldn't escape. She was stuck there. And that was the big problem. And so she felt like the only way to escape was to kill herself, which she did, which of course it worked out because then the Five was able to bring her back to life. Now we do actually jump over to Emma Frost, and the reason why, because she is confronted by Danny Moonstar. Now, the reason why Emma Frost was standing outside the home of the Five is because she feels like she is responsible for the death of Rockslide. Let me explain. So Emma Frost is actually a teacher. She has been a teacher in X-Men comics throughout the years. And of course, she was the one, I think, who had recruited Rockslide. And so to see Rockslide be dead and not being able to come back to life, it bothers her a lot. It's eating her alive from the inside. And so she feels very bad about the idea that Rockslide may never come back. And the Rockslide they have right now is corrupted. He's not the Rockslide that she remembered, the Rockslide that she actually cared for. And this is kind of Marvel kind of reminding us that Emma Frost does have that sensitive side of her, which of course we have seen so many times in the Dawn of X era of X-Men comics as well, especially when Kitty Pryde had died. But yeah, is Emma Frost just being upset with the idea that she lost one of her students? Now, of course, the book begins to wind down where you actually have the X Factor team kind of just relaxing. They're taking a break. They were able to close the case on Wind Dancer. They were able to relaunch the rebirth process to bring mutants back who had possibly died over the last couple of days, weeks, months, whatever. But of course, you do see small things happening, like, of course, Daken is about to date Aurora, the sister to Northstar, the leader of the X Factor team. But either way, though, while you have the X Factor team kind of relaxing, taking a break, just spending time with one another, that is the moment they see that someone has crash landed on the island. And of course, the person who had crash landed is Siren. Now, Siren is the daughter of Banshee. And the question is now, what happened to her? Because when she crash landed, it's not like she just knocked out and they're like, okay, whatever, wake her up. No, she's dead. And the question is now, what happened to her? And so now X Factor has another case that they must deal with to figure out what happened to Siren. But this is Now, getting into today's book, we actually do pick up with the X Factor team right now at the Boneyard. Now, remember, the Boneyard is not actually a boneyard. It's basically their home, their tower, their base where they work out of. And so anytime anybody needs the X Factor team to basically, figure out what in the world is going on or to kind of investigate a murder scene or a dead body, of course, they go to the Boneyard to call up the X Factor team. Now, with that being said, while you have the team kind of hanging out, you do have Northstar, the leader of this team, say, hey guys, we got to go because we have another dead body that we basically have to investigate. Because basically you have Northstar take the team over to the dead body of Siren once again. Now, there's a reason why I said what I said earlier in the very beginning of this video, that some things took place between this book and the last book. Because again, at the end of our last video, when the X Factor team found Siren, she just crash landed in the middle of the island and died. But now here they are, they're finding another dead body. And we come to find out that this right here takes place 10 days after the last dead body we saw at the end of our last video. Because you have Northstar say that after they found the last dead body, of course the five mutants who are able to bring someone back to life, they brought Siren back to life. Here she is right now, dead again. So something is going on, because why is somebody dying twice in 1 week when Siren is not part of any team at all? Not X-Force, not X-Men, not Excalibur, not Marauders, not Hellions, and definitely not this team. And so the question is right now, why is Siren dying so much? Who killed her the first time and who killed her the second time? Now, you do have the X Factor team being able to kind of investigate the area, look around, try to find some more clues to figure out what in the world is going on. But for right now, they don't have enough clues to go off of except what's on her body. And what I mean is that they're kind of able to detect different kinds of traces of different things on her dead body. Like, for example, dust, radiation, different things that don't really add up on why in the world they would be on her body. Also, for Daken, the son of Wolverine, he was able to determine that her body smells like cold medicine, which is very weird as well. But either way, you do have the X Factor team say they're probably better off taking her dead body back to the Healing Gardens so that Dr. Reyes, of course, a character we have seen in most of the X-Men books, can begin the process of actually examining the dead body to see what had actually killed Siren. But again, the question is though, who is out there killing Siren? Because now she had died twice. Now, of course, for Polaris, who is supposed to be a close friend of Siren, is beginning to believe that Siren may have lied to her on what actually has been going on in her life the last couple weeks. And so right now, you have X Factor wondering, is somebody actually out there killing Siren, or is Siren doing something to kill herself? And the question is, why? And so right now, all they can do is just follow the clues, and hopefully they can figure something out. And so then this actually leads into a very awkward conversation between Prodigy, Rachel Summers, and also Dr. Reyes. And the reason why I'm saying this because while you have Dr. Reyes beginning to do an autopsy on the dead body of Siren, the second dead body of Siren, you actually have Prodigy actually asking Dr. Reyes about the dead bodies of previous mutants that have died, but of course, there are a new version of them out there in the world. So for example, usually now in the world of X-Men, thanks to Jonathan Hickman, when you die, you have 5 mutants begin the process of making a clone version of your dead body and downloading your memories into that new body of yours. But for Prodigy, he wants to know what happens to the dead bodies of the mutants who had died. And so now he wants to know, can he actually do some research on them? Because when it comes to Prodigy, he's basically able to understand almost anything that happens around the world. Like his knowledge about almost anything is just crazy powerful. But when it comes to Prodigy, he just wants to know what happens to dead bodies of mutants after they have died. Like, how do people actually dispose of those dead bodies? Now, he does have a legit reason why he's doing this. And the reason why, because for Prodigy, he's hoping that if he's actually able to study all the different dead bodies of X-Men characters that have died ever since the beginning of Jonathan Hickman's work on the X-Men titles, then basically Prodigy will be able to get a better understanding on what actually happens to mutants when they die. So for example, if someone is stabbed, cut, or beat up, or possibly injured by some kind of poison, Prodigy will be able to actually figure out what killed that person at a better, faster rate. Because that's what Prodigy power does. He's able to understand and learn almost anything across the universe. And right now, he wants to learn how dead bodies actually work. Because if he's able to actually learn how dead bodies work, then that can help his team out, the X Factor team, down the road when they basically find another dead body. But of course, this is also Prodigy trying to figure out, if he does this, could it give him a better idea on what in the world is actually happening to Siren? Because right now, Siren dying is very weird. It's very unique. And how she's dying is also very unique. It wasn't like she was choked to death or some kind of, shot, stab, or anything else. It's just like someone killed her and made her crash into the ground to basically kill her. And so this is Prodigy saying, if I'm able to actually study dead bodies and Siren's dead body, I'll be able to figure out in the future what happened to them without actually bringing those dead bodies over to Dr. Reyes. But after that, you do have the X Factor team begin to interrogate Siren, because of course she was brought back to life thanks to the 5 once again. But with her being alive again, you do have the X Factor team begin to basically interrogate her to hopefully figure out what in the world killed her. Why in the world has she been killed not once, but twice now? Now, when it comes to Siren, she's trying to play it off. Like basically she made a mistake and that's how she died. But you have to remember, when it comes to Siren, she's just like her father Banshee. She has the ability to fly. And so with somebody who has been flying for a very long time, even if made a mistake, you're still able to find a way out of that mistake to basically save your life. And so now the question is Siren lying? Now Siren is trying to play it off, like again, I'm saying, she's trying to play it off like she was drunk or possibly just made a mistake. But of course, you have every single member of the X Factor team that's able to basically detect a lie, tell us, the readers, that apparently when it comes to Siren, she's lying about something. She knows something is wrong. Something's affecting her, which of course is making her die over and over again. But the question is, though, what in the world is making her die over and over again? But either way, though, you do kind of have Siren just run out of the boneyard because she's very upset with the X Factor team basically confronting her. Now, this is where we are going to wrap up today's video because you actually do have Polaris go outside to confront Siren. Because remember what I said earlier, Polaris and Siren, they're supposed to be good friends, but right now Siren is hiding something from Polaris. Now you do have Polaris, which again is the daughter of Magneto, staying calm and trying to connect with her best friend again to see if her best friend can actually tell her why in the world she died twice, because that is huge. And now she's on her third body, and they're hoping that this third body won't die away as well. But that is the moment you have Siren begin the process of actually using one of her powers where she's kind of able to, what's the word I'm looking for? She's able to mind control you by singing to you, putting you in a trance, where of course you kind of have to follow every single direction she gives you. And right now is Siren kind of controlling Polaris to have Polaris kind of forget what actually is going on with the case, but to have Polaris help her hide her big secret. But this is where we are going to end today. What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the reign of X era of X-Men comics, where we basically pick up with X Factor number 7 and X Factor number 8. Yes, we are going to cover another 2 issues in today's video for the reign of X era. Now, with that being said, with X Factor number 7 and 8, it basically continues the idea of X Factor trying to figure out what in the world is going on with Siren. Remember, Siren is the daughter of Banshee, and Banshee is an old X-Men character. Matter of fact, when Chris Claremont took over the X-Men title back in 1975, Banshee was one of the characters that joined the new X-Men team. Now, with that being said, his daughter has the same ability as he does, meaning that she can basically scream to kind of help her fly and glide across areas. And so with that, right now they're trying to figure out what in the world is going on with Siren, because she has died multiple times in a matter of weeks. Maybe just 2 weeks, and that is it. And the thing is, how she dies is weird, because a lot of times when she dies, it's just her crash landing to the ground dying. And of course, it's weird because she's a character that can fly. And so right now it's X Factor wondering what in the world is going on. At the same time, they still have other problems to deal with, because their team is a very, not a massive team, but a very complex team. Now, we actually do pick up with X Factor number 7, and we actually pick up with Prodigy. Now, Prodigy right now is freaking out, because we kind of find out that basically he has a boyfriend, and his boyfriend is Speed. Now, remember, Speed is one of the twins of the Scarlet Witch. And basically, Speed is, of course, Prodigy's boyfriend. But the reason why you have Prodigy kind of freaking out right now, because Speed is asking Prodigy how he died. Because remember, the X-Men have the ability now to bring almost anybody back to life. well, really make you a clone body and download your memories into that clone body. But the thing is, Prodigy was one of the characters that was brought back to life because Prodigy died a long time ago, basically when the one operation attacked the school and killed a bunch of children. And so with that, Prodigy was one of the kids that was killed off. And so you have Prodigy telling Speed, his boyfriend, yes, I was brought back to life because I died years ago. Are you happy? The problem is, though, the reason why Speed was calling Prodigy so many times is because Speed wants to tell Prodigy, you did not die that night, meaning that you were brought back to life without any kind of proof that you actually died. Because the night you supposedly had died, you were with me, and we were basically making out in the club, meaning that there could be another Prodigy out there who's just living a normal life. And this Prodigy is just a clone body of Prodigy that was made on accident. Because when it comes to the five, the ones who make the clone bodies, they want proof that a person had died before they make a new version of that person, so that you don't have two of them out there in the world. But right now it sounds like there is two Prodigies out there in the world. Now, we actually do pick up with the character known as Daken. Now, remember, Daken or Daken is actually the son of Wolverine. Now, of course, by this point, Daken or Daken, however you want to pronounce it, is part of the X Factor team. And so by this point in Marvel Comics, he is a good guy. Because when Daken first appeared, he was a bad guy. But now he is basically a good guy. Now, of course, throughout the entire X Factor series, we have been watching Daken falling in love with Aurora. And remember, Aurora is the twin sister, or just the sister of Northstar. And Northstar is the leader of the X Factor team. But of course, Northstar is watching Daken very closely because he wants to make sure that Daken does not break the heart of his sister. Because remember, when X Factor came together, they were trying to figure out who in the world killed Aurora. Now, of course, they never had figured out who did that in this series, but of course they figured out she did die, and so that they were able to bring her back to life. But either way, it's Northstar being more protective over his sister because of that moment. So even though he believes that Daken or Daken has changed and gotten better and could be a good guy now, it's still him protecting his sister from the possibility of dying again. But it was also Northstar getting Daken ready for his next mission, which is to basically tell Siren, because Siren has been dying a lot. And of course, they're trying to figure out why is she dying so much? Who is killing her, or why is she killing herself? Like, what is the whole deal with Siren dying so many times? And so basically, Daken has been following her around town. Now, of course, Daken does call up the X Factor team, and he does give them updates on what's going on with Siren. Now, Daken calls up Polaris and tells Polaris about what is happening. Here's the thing, though. Polaris lies to her team about what Daken tells her. Because remember, we saw that basically Polaris has been taken over by Siren. And so right now, Polaris is basically working for Siren. And so anytime Daken gives Polaris any kind of information, it's false information. And so you have Eye-Boy, a character who has a bunch of eyes all over his body. One of his eyes is able to detect when someone is lying. And so, of course, he realized that Polaris is lying for some strange reason. And for Eye-Boy, it makes no sense on why in the world she will lie about the intel that Daken's giving them to her. Now, you do have this brief moment in the book where you basically have Speed run into Northstar as Speed is kind of sneaking out of the room of Prodigy. Because Prodigy does not want anyone to know that basically him and Speed are dating. And so he's trying to sneak Speed out. But of course, Speed runs into Northstar. Now, Speed used to be classified as a mutant because the Scarlet Witch was also a mutant, but Speed is no longer a mutant because Scarlet Witch is no longer a mutant. But either way, you do have Speed run into Northstar, and Speed is a huge fan of Northstar because Northstar is a speedster just like Speed. The problem is though, Northstar is very fast, faster than Speed. So fast that basically Northstar is the fastest mutant on the world. That's what Northstar says his own self. But either way, you also have Northstar tell Speed that basically Northstar can fly. And so it's kind of like Northstar just meeting a huge fan, and the story does move on from that point. Now, here comes the weird part about Polaris, because while you have the X Factor team right now going around questioning different people who are basically close to Siren, you do have Daken try to call up Polaris to give Polaris updates on Siren because he's been telling her all over the place. But every time he tries to call up Polaris, Polaris doesn't answer at all. And that right there is very huge. Now, with that being said, you also have every single person who's a close friend of Siren talking to X Factor, kind of mentioning the same thing, that basically nothing seems weird about Siren. Just the idea of her dying so many times over the last couple weeks. Now, this is where things get even crazier because while you have Daken continue to follow Siren, you have the X Factor team meeting up and trying to figure out what in the world is still going on with Siren. But here comes the problem though. When the X Factor team split up earlier to go to talk to different people that were basically close to Siren, of course, one of the people was supposed to be Polaris and Rachel Summers. The problem was though, Polaris never did link up with Rachel Summers. Polaris went on her own to talk to one of the people that was close to Siren. And so when Rachel Summers walks into the room, she had no idea that basically the X Factor team has been working on the case of Siren. And that right there is huge because then you have Polaris begin to lie and say, no, Rachel, you and I were together earlier, remember? But of course, Eyeboy, one of his eyes, is able to detect when somebody is lying. And so you basically have Eyeboy tell the X Factor team that Polaris is lying. And so, of course, you basically have Rachel Summer read Polaris' mind to find out that she is being controlled by a character known as the Morrigan. And I really hope I pronounced that correctly. But either way, though, Morrigan is one of those old Marvel characters. And basically the character has a lot of origins, and one of her origins is that she kind of represents death and battle, or she is another version of death. Now, with that being said, it's basically a being that is able to possess other people by jumping over to body. And basically this being has been jumping over to body with Siren. So every time Siren dies but is brought back to life, you have the Morrigan just jump into the new body of Siren. And so earlier in our last video, Morrigan did kind of take over the body of Polaris. Now, Rachel Summers was able to realize that. She tells the X Factor team, and that tells Northstar that basically Daken has been following Siren, and that with him following Siren was a trap. And so you have Northstar run over to where Daken is at to find Daken basically almost beaten to death. Like Daken almost died by the hands of Siren, who have been possessed by the Morrigan. And so now the X Factor team knows what in the world is going on with Siren. Now, this is where you can basically say the writing was on the wall when it came to basically the X Factor book. And what I mean is that X Factor was canceled literally 3 books after this one right here. And so with that, you have X Factor trying to wrap everything up in a nice little bow because the last issue is basically a tie-in to the Hellfire Gala event. And so with that, they have to wrap up the storyline with this book right here, the next one, and also issue number 9. But with that being said, we actually do pick up with Daken once again right now, just taking the bath as a way to kind of heal his body up. Because Daken does have a a healing factor like his father, Wolverine, Logan. But of course, it's not as, I want to say his is not as strong as Logan, or his is stronger than Logan. I'm trying to remember. But either way, though, basically he is getting healed up. Now he is confronted by Aurora. And once again, it's just X Factor continuing the idea of having these two relationship grow to hopefully make something big between these two characters, because these two characters do like each other a lot. And I mean a lot. But then the ending of issue number 7 is very huge, because basically we actually pick up with a huge time jump. Not a huge one, but like a couple hours, where basically somebody has begun the process of actually attacking the Boneyard, the base of the X Factor team. And right now, most of the characters of the X Factor team are to be believed to be dead. Only 3 characters are left, and those 3 characters are Daken, Prodigy, and also iBoy. And so right now, the 3 characters must work together to figure out who killed the rest of the team, basically right now in the Boneyard. Now, when we actually pick up with X Factor number 8, it's basically the book that tells us what happened before the ending of the last chapter, where of course, everybody else in the Boneyard was killed except Prodigy, iBoy, and Daken. Where, of course, we pick up with Daken and Aurora continuing the idea of these two characters basically becoming a couple, which honestly, that has been the trend this entire series. But either way, it's just one more page to remind us, like, hey, these two characters, they really do like each other, but of course, they're taking it very, very slow. But right after that, we basically do pick up with iBoy. Now remember, iBoy's body is basically covered in eyes, but each eye has the ability to do something different. And that right there is very huge, because when Rachel Summers finds iBoy right now is basically freaking out and standing in the middle of the Boneyard, and he's scared. He is literally freaking out. But the reason why he is freaking out, because with one of his eyes, he basically saw something. He saw something crawling through the Boneyard in the shadows. And of course, it scared him a lot. And he knows something bad was about to happen in the Boneyard, because that one eye was able to show him what was crawling in the Boneyard. But then we actually pick up with Prodigy. Now, right now, you have Prodigy looking over the photo that basically he saw earlier when Speed came by to the Boneyard. Now, remember, that photo is basically talking about the idea that there could be 2 Prodigies out there in the world, because when it came to Prodigy being brought back to life, the only reason why he was brought back to life because there was a point in X-Men comics where a bunch of kids were killed, and Cyclops told the 5 when they were bringing back characters who had died in the past that Prodigy was one of the characters that had died. But that photo that Speed had basically said no. Prodigy never died. That basically Prodigy was with me the entire time. And so it was right now playing with the idea that there could be 2 Prodigies in the world. The one we saw in the old X-Men comic days and the one we have right now in X Factor. But of course, with Prodigy, he began to study the photo. And when he does, he was able to figure out that this photo was basically Photoshop. Someone is trying to play games with Prodigy. But then we actually pick up with Daken in the bath right now, relaxing. Now, this is the moment where we basically pick up where X Factor number 7, the last chapter in our video, kind of left off at before that huge time jump, where of course we saw Daken and Aurora in the tub together, kind of taking a bath together as a way to build that bond even tighter. But of course, we kind of find out that was never Aurora at all. That basically we're left to believe that the Morrigan has basically invaded the Boneyard and has the process are in the process, of taking over different characters in the X Factor building, starting with Aurora. Because while you have Dick in the bath with Aurora, thinking that it's actually her, it's not her, and she begins to attack Dakin's mind. Now, of course, you have Dakin being able to break free, but when he does, he realized that he was never with Aurora. And that right there tells Dakin he has to warn the others. And so that leads into the moment where you have iBoy right now hiding out in his bedroom because he was able to see the Morrigan earlier with one of his eyes. And so right now, of course, he's freaking out because he realized that basically right now the Morrigan, the being that the X Factor team was trying to stop, has basically invaded the boneyard. And so right now you have him freaking out because right now she's going around trying to find each member of the X Factor team to kill them off. Now, that is the moment you do have iBoy luckily be saved by Dakin. But here comes the big problem though, because right as soon Dakin finds iBoy, you have the Morrigan basically attack both Dakin and iBoy. Now, of course, Dakin and iBoy are able to get away, but with this happening right now, it does pick up right where X Factor number 7 left off, and so right now, technically, we have caught up into the present day. But with that being said, you do have Dakin tell the team, well, really, him and Prodigy and iBoy, that right now they are the only 3 characters left as a way to stop the Morrigan from killing off anybody else on the island. And so, of course, they basically need to make a plan to stop her before she's actually able to escape. Now, you basically do have iBoy and also Prodigy, and Dakin as well, examine the body of both Northstar and Aurora. Because while you have most of the X Factor team killed off, the way Northstar and Aurora left behind after being killed off basically tells Prodigy, also iBoy and Dakin, that this was some kind of ritual. That basically right now the Morrigan was using Northstar and Aurora for some kind of ritual because those 2 characters are siblings. Now, Prodigy, remember, when it comes to Prodigy, he is able to understand almost anything he studies. So basically, if he wants to learn something, he's able to actually learn it and understand it very well at a very fast pace. And so right now it's him trying to figure out what kind of ritual was done on Northstar and Aurora that the Morrigan was trying to do. But of course, you have the Morrigan beginning to attack iBoy, Prodigy, and Dakin. And so you have Dakin tell iBoy and Prodigy to escape because right now Prodigy is the only hope they have to figure out how in the world they can actually stop the Morrigan. But here comes the thing though. As soon as you have iBoy and Prodigy try to escape, Dakin is basically butchered by the Morrigan. So he's basically killed off. But of course, we're left to believe that iBoy and Prodigy were able to actually escape. Now, you do have X Factor basically be brought back to life because remember, when it comes to the X-Men, they have the ability to bring people back to life by making them new clone bodies, and Charles Xavier download the memories into those clone bodies. Now, of course, as soon as the dead X Factor members are brought back to life, you basically have Charles Xavier, iBoy, and Prodigy tell all of them how they all die. Like, hey, you were killed off by a death goddess. And right now, she has taken over the boneyard. So if you want to stop her, I can call in the X-Men. But of course, you have X Factor say, no, they are going to be the ones to basically stop the Morrigan because it was her who killed them. It's their mess and they want to handle their own mess. And so, of course, you do have the X Factor team go back to the boneyard to actually fight against the Morrigan. Now, here's the thing. The X Factor team is going to win because right now they're going to fight the Morrigan in a fair battle. earlier they were killed in their sleep. And so it was not a fair battle. But basically, Charles Xavier did warn the X Factor team because the Boneyard does have a garden of dead bodies. Because remember, Prodigy did ask Dr. Reyes for all the dead bodies of dead X-Men characters over the time of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men work, to basically study the dead bodies to learn more about the dead bodies. And so with those dead bodies being in a garden, the Morrigan had basically taken over those dead bodies and turned them into zombies. So right now the Boneyard is filled with zombies. But of course you do have the characters who are well known for fighting. So like Northstar, Polaris, Dakin, and Rachel Summers, they all go inside to fight against the army of zombies of dead bodies that Prodigy had brought to the Boneyard to study. But either way though, throughout the pages of this book, you basically have the X Factor team kind of able to get rid of the Morrigan, but just temporarily, to bring back Siren. Because remember, the Morrigan does need a host, and that host was Siren. But with the Morrigan temporarily gone, it does give the X Factor team the ability to actually talk to Siren, to figure out what kind of bargain did she make with the Morrigan, because that bargain could be the reason why the Morrigan is here on Krakoa and keeps trying to take over the body of Siren. Now, when we jump into X-Force number 9, yes, we're going to go ahead and do X-Force number 9. I know at the very beginning I did say only X-Force number 7 and 8, but of course I feel like let's go ahead and throw in X-Force number 9 to go ahead and get rid of it, because basically the next and final issue of X-Force is honestly a tie-in to the Hellfire Gala event. Now, with that being said, we actually do go at X Factor right now, using the powers of Rachel Summers to kind of read the mind of Siren, to hopefully figure out what in the world happened when it came to her and also the Morrigan. Now, of course, while you have it inside the mind of Siren, here comes the big problem. They can't go deeper into her mind. Like basically the Morrigan have put up some kind of barriers in the mind of Siren to block certain memories so that X Factor cannot access those memories. Now there is a way around it, but of course it's a very difficult task to get around those different barriers. Now with all that information being said, of course Rachel Summers does have a plan to learn more on how in the world the Morrigan was able to make a bargain with Siren. And what Rachel Summers wants to do is basically throw all our characters of X Factor, except Polaris, into the mind of the Morrigan. Because what you have Rachel Summers say is that basically there is a way around the barrier that the Morrigan have put up. But of course, to go around this barrier, you're going to have to go through the mind of the Morrigan instead. And so you basically have Rachel Summers use her powers to baseball pitch basically Dakin, iBoy, Prodigy, and Northstar into the mind of the Morrigan to hopefully learn how in the world the Morrigan was able to make some kind of deal with Siren. Now, once they're actually able to read the mind of the Morrigan, you basically have the mind of the Morrigan begin to tell our heroes what is the key to actually defeating the Morrigan. And basically, they need the character known as Shatterstar. Now, Shatterstar is actually an old-time X-Men character. But here's the thing. Shatterstar is right now locked away in the Mojoverse. And remember, the Mojoverse is basically a dimension where you basically have the people of the Mojoverse just love television. They love everything being televised. Now, with that being said, basically right now, X Factor has been banned from the Mojoverse. Because remember, earlier they went to the Mojoverse to save Wind Dancer. But when they did that, of course, they did cause a lot of problems. But either way, they have no choice but to have to go back to Mojoverse to save Shatterstar. And so it's Northstar asking Prodigy, does he have a way to actually get them back into Mojoverse? Because again, they have been officially banned from there. Now, basically, what happened is you basically have X Factor use Dazzler to put on a show for the Mojoverse. Because remember, when it comes to Dazzler, Dazzler is one of the old X-Men characters fans used to love in the early 1980s, had her own book as well. But either way, when it comes to Dazzler right now, you basically have Dazzler right now throwing a concert for the Mojoverse to basically give X Factor away to kind of get someone else in there to threaten Mojo to release Shatterstar. And of course, that person is Magic and Danny Moonstar. And so while you have Dazzler throwing a cold concert, well, behind the scenes, you have Magic and also Danny Moonstar tell Mojo to release Shatterstar back to the hands of X Factor and X-Men, which of course he does do that. Now, this is actually the moment where we basically kind of learn why you have Siren kind of stuck with the Morrigan. And basically what you have the memories of the Morrigan and Siren tell us is that basically the Morrigan wanted to kill 1,000 mutants. It wanted a huge mass murder scene as a way to kind of please itself. Now, of course, it wanted to kill 1,000 mutants. And Siren did not want that to happen. The death of 1,000 people, because that could possibly put in play the idea of the 5 also being wiped out in that 1,000 death, which could mean that the mutants no longer have a way to bring back people if they die. And so what Siren did instead was she basically offered herself to die for the Morrigan 1,000 times, but 1,000 different ways. And so basically that explains why she has been dying over and over again in the earlier X Factor books, because she made that promise to basically save 1,000 mutants' lives. But then we actually pick up with the death of the Morrigan, because she does die by the hands of Shatterstar. Now, basically, we're not actually told how in the world Shatterstar was able to kill the Morrigan. All we do know is that basically he's part of some kind of ritual or some prophecy, And so, of course, with him being able to fulfill that prophecy, the Morrigan died. But the problem is, though, right after he does kill her, some kind of substance comes out of her, goes through Shatterstar's heart, and it goes through another character who, of course, seems very close to Shatterstar. And so with that, basically, we're kind of left to wonder what was that substance that's right now connecting Shatterstar to another male character, the possibility of a lover. But of course, we're not told about that in this book. That gets saved for the final issue of X Factor, which is X Factor number 10. So with that being What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the Hellfire Gala event. And matter of fact, we actually do pick up with the last chapter of the Hellfire Gala event, which is X Factor number 10. Now remember, the Hellfire Gala event was basically a way for Marvel to do a storyline where it's the mutants having a party, where they invite a bunch of humans to the party to basically show humans that mutants are no longer second class, that basically mutants are now first class. Now, when I say first class, I really mean like mutants can show that when they are left alone and being able to actually work to help the earth out, they actually do a great job. They're not a race to basically hate on or to try to get rid of. Now, with that being said, though, the Hellfire Gala event was a party where you had the mutants invite a bunch of humans to the party to show the humans, look at what we have accomplished in a short period of time being a nation, which is a great thing to see. But right after the mutants had showed all the very important humans at this party what they were able to accomplish, you then had the humans realize that the mutants turned Mars into a planet where now humans and mutants can live on. And so it's the X-Men and the mutants basically saying, look at what we have accomplished. Look at what we did. Now, the Hellfire Gala event, the actual crossover, did use every single X-Men title at the time. So X-Factor, X-Force, X-Men, Marauders, all of them. But when it comes to the final chapter, which is X Factor number 10, even though it is the last chapter of the Hellfire Gala event, it's also the last chapter for the X Factor series, the final book. Now, of course, I'm kind of sad about that because X Factor was a good series, but I can see why it was canceled because at the end, the story did get a little bit crazy. But either way, though, X Factor is the last chapter of the Hellfire Gala event, and also it's the last issue for the X Factor series in the Krakoa era. Now, with all that being said, this focuses only on X Factor, and it's kind of like a send-off, like, hey, they're not going to break up, but they're going to be around and behind the scenes now because their book has been officially canceled. And so getting into X Factor number 10, we basically do pick up right now with X Factor getting ready for the big party, the Hellfire Gala event. Now, with that being said, while the team is getting ready, you do have some characters very worried about what could possibly happen at this party. And really, that character is Polaris. Now, of course, we do know why Polaris is very worried, because this section does take place before all the chapters that we have covered so far. But basically, at the Hellfire Gala event, besides the mutant race showing off the different things that they were able to accomplish as a nation, but also showing off what they did to Mars, you also had the Hellfire Gala event basically be used to announce the new X-Men team. And of course, each member was selected by a very special reason. And so with that being said, Polaris is worried because she wants to be an X-Men. She wants to be on this new team that is going to be announced. Now, we already did Planet-Size X-Men number 1, and we also did the chapter that came before that, which is, I want to say, X-Men number 21. But basically, they announced the new X-Men team, and Polaris was one of the characters that was selected to be on that team. And so right now she's nervous, but by the end of the book, of course, she would no longer be nervous. Now, this is going to be a huge party. And so you do have the X Factor team getting ready for this big party. Now, if you're new to Marvel Comics and you have no idea what X Factor is at this point, well, let me explain, because they have changed a lot over the years since their first appearance. But basically, X Factor is your detective team on Krakoa. They basically figure out if a mutant is dead or not, and if that mutant is dead, they have to figure out how that mutant died. And the reason why, because remember, the X-Men and the mutant race have a way to bring someone back to life by basically the five mutants who are able to make you a clone body. But when they make you a clone body, they download your memories into that clone body. But they have to make sure you're dead first before there's two of you running around the earth at the same time. And so with that being said, that was the reason why X Factor was basically made for. But either way, you do have the X Factor team go ahead and leave for the party. Now, as soon as the team arrives at the party, you can tell that basically this is the writer saying goodbye to the X Factor team. Because the way she's writing this book is kind of her saying, like, this is the end. These characters came a long way, and I did so much with these characters in a very short period of time. It's hard for this writer to say goodbye to this title. Now, with that being said, though, you do basically have the X Factor team enjoying the party. Now, Prodigy does leave the party because he apparently left something behind, but of course he's going somewhere else because his storyline is going to continue in this book and possibly other books down the road. But as soon as Prodigy leaves, of course, the party continues on, and you have X Factor actually bonding, having a good time, and actually enjoying the event. Now, we actually do see Prodigy go to LA, and he goes to a club. Now, this is a storyline that kind of has started in the earlier books of X Factor, but we only got small samples here and there. But basically, a cell phone was left behind at this club. Now, for Prodigy, he believes that this cell phone was left behind years ago. But you do have the people who are like bartenders at this bar tell him, no, you left this cell phone here a couple nights ago or a few nights ago. That night you basically disappeared when you left with, and it stops right there. Now remember, in the earlier parts of X Factor, a photo got out of him and Speed basically kissing and making out. The problem is though, Prodigy's kind of like, wait a second. How in the world did this photo get taken? On top of that, when did this happen? And so we're left to believe the idea that there could be two Prodigies out there, or the fact that Prodigy just does not remember that particular night. There's so many questions left around the idea of what's happening right now with Prodigy. Now, that is the moment where we basically do pick up with Rachel Summers and Kitty Pryde. Now, Rachel Summers is actually the more important character for this moment. And the reason why, because she does detect Shatterstar. Now, Shatterstar is a very important character for this section. And the reason why, because what happened back in X Factor number 8 and X Factor number 9, where basically you had Shatterstar deal with a character known as the Morrigan, a character or a being that kinds of represents death in a different way. But basically, what happened at the end of X Factor number 9 was that you had this being talk to Shatterstar about the idea of when mutants die, they come very close to death, and they actually come very close of meeting some kind of being that represents death. But of course, with the mutant race now having a shortcut or a way to cheat death and bring someone back to life, the big question is now, do mutants even have a soul? Or what happens to a mutant soul when they die and they get very close to meeting death, to meeting a god of death? Because with the 5 being able to make you a clone body and then download your memories into that clone body, is that your soul in there still, or is your soul gone? Do you even have a soul in this new body? And that is the big question that kind of got left unanswered when it came to X Factor number 8, 9, and of course this book as well. Now, that is the moment where we basically do pick up with Prodigy. Now, right now, you have Prodigy basically trying to figure out what happened to him on that particular night. And so he does go to a particular house. Now, when he goes to this house, he does confront some random man. Now, when this man sees Prodigy, this man begins to freak out. And this kind of tells us what happened to Prodigy that night and why he does not remember. And the reason why, because this man right here had killed Prodigy years ago. This man was going around killing black gay men in the area. And of course, he had killed off Prodigy because Prodigy is a gay black man. Which explains why Prodigy does not remember what happened that night, because it seems like Cerebro did not download all the memories of Prodigy, or when Prodigy died, Cerebro was not doing that task. Because remember, when you're brought back to life, Charles Xavier does download your memories into your new clone body, but Cerebro is now used as like a memory bank that holds all the memories of different mutants across the world. And so there could be basically some kind of information that was left out with Cerebro, and that explains why Prodigy had no idea about how he died or why he forgot that particular night. But thanks to him or his past self leaving him clues to kind of help him realize what happened that night, you have Prodigy find this man and begin the process of beating this man. Now, getting back to the party, the Hellfire Gala event, we do pick up with Kyle, the husband of Northstar. And remember, Kyle is actually a human, but you do have Kyle kind of meeting up with Steve Rogers. But while they're having their conversation, we do kind of find out that this section right here, this moment, does take place after the X-Men new team was announced. And of course, one of the people who was selected was Polaris. And so you do have her X Factor team, saying congratulations, but also saying goodbye because she'll now leave X Factor and move over to X-Men. But then we actually jump over to Daken and also Aurora. And right now, this is them kind of announcing to everybody that basically they are dating. Now, this was technically announced back in Hellions, the earlier chapter of the Hellfire Gala event, but basically in that earlier chapter, we did see Wildchild get very upset with the idea that Aurora is now dating Daken and not him, because of course Wildchild and Aurora used to date, and Wildchild is not happy about the idea his ex-girlfriend has a new boyfriend. Now, with that being said, this is where you kind of have the writer kind of wrap up loose ends from earlier chapters in this series. Like, for example, how did Aurora die? Who killed Aurora? Because remember, the X Factor team was basically assembled with the idea that something happened to Aurora. And of course, they couldn't figure out what actually happened to her. They know she was killed, but they have no idea why she was killed off. Now, they did find out who killed her, and it was Josh, some random character, but Josh was also dead. And so that is the moment you have Daken say, listen, I know right now that basically that Aurora has a disorder, a personality disorder. And of course, she was the one who had killed Josh. And with her killing Josh, she needed something to cover herself up, to basically cover up the idea that she killed somebody. And so it made it seem like Josh killed her and then Josh killed himself. But in reality, she killed Josh and then killed herself. It's weird. It's a real fast wrap up, but hey, we got to move on. Now, getting back over to Prodigy, we actually do pick up with Prodigy right now, talking to iBoy, where basically this is where we kind of learn the mysterious thing that was going on with Prodigy. And what was going on with Prodigy was his past self was trying to figure out who was going around killing off black gay men in the area. He was trying to track down a serial killer. And so his past self went on an adventure to basically figure out who was the serial killer. But he knew that when it came to Cerebro, there could be a blind spot moment where Cerebro would not be able to back up this certain memory. And so the past Prodigy basically left a bunch of clues for his future self or present day self to kind of help remember what happened that night on why he just disappeared. Because while he was trying to track down this serial killer, he got caught and he got killed by this serial killer. But all the clues kind of helped the present day Prodigy remember everything. And of course, now he knows what happened to him on that particular night. Now, you do have iBoy kind of burn this serial killer, not to death, but kind of like a small sunburn. Actually, a really bad sunburn, not small. But then you have Aurora and Daken appear, where of course they do tell this serial killer, like, listen, man, you are going to be handed off to the cops. They now know everything. They have all the evidence to prove that basically you're this racist man who went around killing off black men, black gay men, because you hated black men, but you also hated gay people as well. And so now you're going to jail. Hope you enjoy prison. Now, this is where you basically have the X Factor book kind of get wrapped up. And what I mean by that is you do have Prodigy, iBoy, and the rest of the team go back to the event where, of course, they do have fun. And you do have Prodigy run into Speed. Now, remember, Speed is the son of the Scarlet Witch. And I want to say Speed and Wiccan are no longer mutants because Scarlet Witch is not a mutant anymore either. But either way, Speed is dating Prodigy. But while you have everyone kind of having a good old time and having a blast, iBoy sees something. And remember, iBoy has different kind of eyes all around his body, and each eye does a different thing. But one of his eyes saw something, and of course, when everybody goes and turns on the corner to see what actually happened, of course, they're going to find out it's the dead body of the Scarlet Witch. Yes, the Scarlet Witch has been killed at the Hellfire Gala event. And this is huge because now the next adventure for X Factor takes place in the trial of Magneto. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So with that being said, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.